There we go. Okay. So this week is the portion Naso, and we are, it is not the same portion that's being read in Israel, as I think I alluded to that last week, that because the second day of Shavuot is only observed outside of Israel, the second day of Shavuot was Shabbat. So because of that, the Torah reading for second day of Shavuot is one just for the holiday. It's not the regular Shabbat reading. But there was no second day of Shavuot in Israel. So they went from first day Shavuot on Friday, and as soon as Shabbat began, the holiday was over, and then it was Shabbat. So in Israel, they read Naso last week. And so this week, they're reading Baha'alotecha, the next portion. And so we're a portion behind. And this happens frequently because of Shavuot falling on Shabbat, or Passover falling on the 8th day of Passover falling on Shabbat. That would cause us to be out of sync with Israel. And we get back together again, probably with the portion Chukat and Balak, a little bit. So Chukat is chapter 19 of Numbers. We're only on chapter 4 now in the Eitz Chaim, page 791. So Chukat and Balak are often combined, and I would wager, I didn't check the calendar, that Chukat and Balak will be combined for us, but in Israel they will be separated. So when we do Chukat Balak, Israel will be doing Balak, and that's how we come back together again. So just for a few weeks now, we are off kilter with Israel. It raises the issue of whether does it make sense to have 2 days of Yontiv outside of Israel? And there have been some in the non-Orthodox world who have tried to make that argument. And there have been, so in the Reform movement, there is only 1 day of Yontiv, and even for Rosh Hashanah. Now, Rosh Hashanah is always 2 days, even in Israel. But for the Reform movement, Rosh Hashanah is usually 1 day. There are some Reform synagogues that are that might be comprised of people who have been brought up in the conservative movement, and they will offer a second day option. But when we were wandering for 5 years and needed to rent places for services, we were able to rent Einstein High School in Kensington for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but only for the first day of Rosh Hashanah, because Montgomery County public schools are only closed 1 day for Rosh Hashanah. But we were able to use Temple Emmanuel in Kensington for the second day because they didn't have second day services at all. So it came in handy that the Reform movement had that policy, that it enabled a building to be available and enabled me to be in a place in walking distance in Kensington so that I could walk to Einstein on the first day and to Temple Emmanuel on the second day. So that all worked out. Yes, so Reconstructionist synagogues would be that way, mostly that way too. Yes, Arnie. Yes.
Doesn't the Torah actually mention the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, but not 2 days of any of the holidays?
No, the Rosh Hashanah is not listed as Rosh Hashanah in the Torah. It's listed as the first day of the 7th month, and it's first day of 7th month, not the first 2 days of the 7th month. It is a rabbinic dictum to have Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, and it is the rabbis teach that we have to do Rosh Hashanah for 2 days, but the other holidays they maintain as 1 day in Israel. The reason it's 2 days out of Israel is because of the ancient way in which the new month was declared. that the rabbis said that to declare a new month, the witnesses have to come to the Sanhedrin to report that they saw the new moon, and they would be tested by the rabbis in the Sanhedrin. What exactly did you see? Was it cloudy? Was it not cloudy? What did the moon actually look like? And if they accepted the testimony of the witnesses, then the rabbis would declare, yes, this is the new month, and signal fires would be lit all across Israel to let people know that the new month has begun. And by the time those signal fires got out of Israel, then it was a question, what exactly is the new month day? And so therefore, because Yom Tov would be 2 weeks later, Sukkot is the 15th of Tishrei, Passover is the 15th of Nisan. So you have to prepare in time for you have to be sure you got the holiday the right time. So that's why an extra day was added. Now we don't rely on witnesses anymore. We have the astronomical formula. It's well known, and like I keep saying, HebCal is the one website to go to for Jewish calendar stuff, which is the absolute authority. So there is no reason astronomically to have 2 days of Yom Tov anymore. So we still do 2 days of Yom Tov, and most conservative synagogues still do 2 days of Yom Tov because of the idea, and this is reflected a lot, that we are not living in Israel, that there is a privilege to be living in Israel, and that privilege and that mitzvah is displayed in one way by getting to have only 1 day Yom Tov. So you only have one Seder in Israel. Sukkot is a little bit shorter, etc. And here, outside of Israel, this is something we do to reflect that we are not living in Israel. So those synagogues that aren't so Zionist-oriented necessarily, or more astronomically oriented, and you have the formula, so it's a discussion, and there's room in the conservative movement to say that synagogues can do only 1 day Yom Tov. So Har Shalom in Potomac for a while, under one of the rabbis, only had 1 day Yom Tov, but they have 2 days Yom Tov now. B'nai Tzedek in Potomac, I think, only has 1 day Yom Tov, and those might be the only conservative synagogues in the area that do 1 day. Okay, so all that is a tangent to this week's portion, and let me just let somebody else in. All that to this week's portion, Naso, which happens to be the longest portion in the Torah. Hi, Saul. The Torah originally was divided up not into chapter and verse, but into Torah portions. So when the rabbis refer to a verse, if they did in their discussions, they would refer to a verse in a portion as opposed to referring to Numbers chapter 4, verse 21. So chapters and verses, we should know, are put there by the church fathers from the early Middle Ages. They're the ones who divided up the Bible into chapter and verse. And then it's only because how they did it that it looks kind of funny sometimes in the way Torah portions begin. So in other words, why is our portion starting in the 21st sentence of chapter 4? Why doesn't it start with verse 1 of chapter 4? Or verse 1 of chapter 5, which is on page 793. So that's why it looks strange that we're starting in the middle of the chapter. But it shouldn't look strange. We should know the rabbis had their system of dividing the portions, and chapter and verse came later. And chapter and verse for the church fathers had nothing to do with Torah portions because they weren't doing Torah portions anymore. They were doing Bible scripture readings. Okay, so if for the church fathers, if you open a Christian Bible, you won't have the names of the Torah portions because that's a Jewish thing. It's not a Christian thing. It's only if you open a Jewish Bible that you will have the names of the portions there. Okay, so that's just for us to understand why it looks kind of strange that the portion Naso begins with verse 21 of chapter 4. Okay, so Naso, like I said, is the longest portion. It continues, it concludes the description of what the Levitical families are charged with doing. So the portion Naso begins with the Gershonite family and what they're in charge of. And the three other families, the Kohathite family, the Merarite family, etc., were talked about at the end of last week's portion, the portion Bamidbar. So we have that transition from last week. And then it goes on to discuss a few other topics that you'll see will be kind of unusual. But the bulk of the portion, what makes it it has the longest chapter of 89 sentences, is the consecration ceremony or the dedication of the Mishkan. That each tribe brought gifts to dedicate the Mishkan as the people are getting ready to start traveling from Mount Sinai. And each tribe is bringing the exact same gift 12 days in a row. So you might question why the Torah just didn't say all 12 tribes brought these exact same gifts on 12 days and save 88 sentences from the chapter. But the rabbis point out that each of the gifts, even though it was exactly the same, were held precious by God, and that by listing them separately in a row to point out to us that all these gifts, even though they seemed the same, they were each precious, and that also that portion, all these 12 days, serves as the Torah reading for Hanukkah. So Hanukkah, which is a holiday celebrated after the Bible already existed, so it was a post-biblical holiday. For the rabbis, you have to read Torah on all holidays that are in the calendar. So what can you read from the Torah about Hanukkah when Hanukkah isn't even in the Torah? So since Hanukkah means dedication, and it's the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem, the rabbis said each day of Hanukkah you read those gifts offered on that day of Hanukkah, and on the 8th day of Hanukkah you read day 8 through 12 to finish the dedication ceremony. So that's the bulk of the portion, but there's still lots of other things to talk about. So I wanted to, let's go right to the this bizarre, sexist, anti-female section in the portion, which begins on page 796, and that would be chapter 5, verse 11. So if you don't have Eitz Chaim, again, the page in Eitz Chaim is 796. Whatever edition of the Chumash you have, look for Naso or look for Numbers chapter 5, verse 11. I'm going to read these sentences and then talk about how our commentary goes out of its way to make sense of this and make it seem kind of relevant to us. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, if any man's wife has gone astray and broken faith with him, in that a man has had carnal relations with her, unbeknown to her husband, and she keeps secret the fact that she has defiled herself without being forced, and there is no witness against her, but a fit of jealousy comes over him, and he is wrought up about the wife who has defiled herself. Or if a fit of jealousy comes over one, and he is wrought up about his wife, although she has not defiled herself, the man shall bring his wife to the priest, and he shall bring as an offering for her 1/10 of an ephah of barley flour. No oil shall be poured upon it, no frankincense shall be laid on it, for it's a grain offering of jealousy, a grain offering of remembrance, which recalls wrongdoing. So clearly, we have several questions. One is, what does this say about marital relations? So that a husband would be jealous of his wife, and that the corollary, the subsequent question to that is, why should a jealous husband be allowed to have a ritual to deal with his jealousy? In other words, why isn't someone just slapping the husband across the face, saying, how dare you be jealous of your wife? Go to a marriage counselor if you have a problem. Talk to your wife about your jealous nature and confront your wife. Why does it escalate right away to go to the Mishkan and later to the temple in Jerusalem for all to see? So your jealousy, what would be a private matter dealt with in the home or privately with a marriage counselor, is now on display for the entire Israelite community to see, because everybody can participate in Mishkan rituals and temple rituals. So you can imagine the line that would form when the temple opens in the morning. So you would have sin offerings stand here, right? So there you'd have to be on display, and everybody knows you've done something wrong, that you need to bring a sin offering to the temple in Jerusalem. So everybody is there for that. And then you want to bring a Thanksgiving offering, stand here. Peace offerings, stand here. You just had a bizarre emission, a purification from an emission, stand here. So it's embarrassing to have gone to the temple in Jerusalem, and before that to the Mishkan, to bring a sacrifice, because your life is on display to the community. And perhaps not everybody in the community is there every day in the Mishkan. There are lots of people around, and you're at least possibly embarrassed in front of the Kohanim themselves, that you have to bring this sacrifice, and this is the way to do it. So there's that. There's the embarrassment feature of this, that your life, your private life, is now on display. And so then what would be how long was this jealousy festering that a Far Side cartoon about this, so I happen to like Far Side cartoons a lot, and Gary Larson has a website that you can get Far Side cartoons every single day if you want, and I actually have that on my phone, so I go every day to see the selection of Far Side cartoons. So yeah, though his cartoons are mostly about animals and bizarre things in life, yes, this could be a bizarre thing too. So you can imagine the level of frustration and how deep the frustration has to go, that the embarrassment doesn't matter anymore, that somehow and there has to be an end to this jealousy. And of course, another aspect of this is it's one-sided, right? There's nothing here. If a wife is jealous of her husband, whether he has cavorted, what's the word here? That he has carnal relations, whether he had carnal relations with another woman or not, there's no room for a woman to bring her husband to the temple. It's only the man bringing his wife to the Mishkan and later to the temple. So there's the sexist element to it, which probably was not a feature of it, or a consideration in the time of the Torah, because it was clear in society 3,000 years ago until 100 or so years ago that women were, yeah, it was wasn't it 1920 with the women were allowed to vote. So yeah, so women were second-class citizens at least until 1920, and still are second-class citizens today. Equal pay, non-equal pay for women, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so even till 100 years ago, it was clear women did not have a say in legal matters, especially when it came to family life. And so therefore it would not have crossed the Torah's mind to consider this to be sexist. What is crossing the Torah's mind is how to deal with the jealousy part, okay? And that husbands can be jealous and will be jealous of their wives. What are we going to do, Torah speaking here, what are we going to do to resolve the jealousy and maintain the marriage and save the marriage? Okay, so let's read the rest of what the Torah says of what the ceremony is, and then we'll look at the commentary below the line. So continuing with verse 16, chapter 5, verse 16, page 797 in the Eitz Chaim, the priest shall bring her forward and have her stand before the Lord. The priest shall take sacral water in an earthen vessel, and taking some of the earth. Now, where's this sacral water coming from? I have no idea. This idea that there's holy water, don't know where. Water is used for daily sacrifices, so so just the fact that the water was brought into the Mishkan and temple precincts make it sacred water. So you couldn't just drink water from it. It could only be used for Mishkan temple purposes. Okay, the priest shall take sacral water in an earthen vessel, and taking some of the earth that is on the floor of the tabernacle, the priest shall put it into the water. Okay, so you taking dirt from the floor, mixing it, so that's holy dirt, but it's dirt, mixing it with water, holy water. After he has made the woman stand before the Lord, the priest shall bare the woman's head. So that talking about embarrassing, you're forcing the woman to bare her head. Okay, and women are not supposed to bare their head in public. So the jealousy, the husband's jealousy, is not only that he and she are coming to the Mishkan for their private life to be on display, but she has to bare her head. And place upon her hands the grain offering of remembrance. So that's the grain offering that the husband, has brought. She has to hold it in her hands. And in the priest's hands shall be the water of bitterness that induces the spell. Okay, so the spell implies magic, and it's not it's not really supposed to be understood as magic. So spell, I think, is as a bad translation. It's just, this is the formulaic that induces the formula, or induces the thing that's supposed to be induced. Yes, Gabe, let me unmute you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
Does bare the head mean shave the head, or just
No,
remove
I think remove the covering from her head.
Okay.
Yes. The priest shall adjure the woman, saying to her, if no man has lain with you, if you have not gone astray in defilement while married to your husband, be immune to harm for this water of bitterness that induces the spell. Yeah, so I don't know why the English is adding that, because it could be translated, hinaki, you should be cleansed from these cursed waters, or these bitter waters. I don't know why this spell here, but if you have gone astray, if you have done nothing wrong, then the water will have no effect on you. But if you have gone astray while married to your husband and have defiled yourself, if a man other than your husband has had carnal relations with you, here the priest shall administer the curse of adjuration to the woman, as the priest goes on to say to the woman, may the Lord make you a curse and an imprecation among your people, as the Lord causes your thigh to sag and your belly to distend. May this water that induces the spell enter your body, causing the belly to distend and the thigh to sag, and the woman shall say, Amen, Amen. The priest shall put these curses down in writing and rub it off into the water of bitterness. Okay, so he's writing this curse, which is sentences 21 to 22, writing that down, and it has God's name on it, right? Yud He Vav He is in that curse. Okay, the priest shall put these curses down in writing. So he's writing it down on a piece of parchment and then rubbing it off into the water. So he's writing it with ink and then rubbing the ink into the water. So he's rubbing off the formula, which includes God's name, into the dirt and the holy water. He's to make the woman drink the water of bitterness. So that concoction of ink, dried ink, dirt, and water is what the woman has to drink that induces the spell. Yeah, so again, the nature of the spell. So that the spell-inducing water may enter her to bring on bitterness. This is like the Salem witch trials, yes. And that's what the idea of using the word spell causes us to think about, and we can't help thinking about it, but that's not what the Torah means. So there's some holiness to this, which smacks of a spell or sorcery, but is not understood to be that way. And somehow this formula, it will not have any effect on an innocent woman, but it will have an effect on a guilty woman. And not only will it will have the effect it will have on an innocent woman, because if we finish, then the priest shall take from the woman's hand the grain offering of jealousy, elevate the grain offering before the Lord, and present it on the altar. The priest shall scoop out the grain offering, a token part of it, turn it into smoke on the altar. Last, he shall make the woman drink the water. Once he has made her drink the water, if she has defiled herself by breaking faith with her husband, the spell-inducing water shall enter her to bring on bitterness, so that her belly shall distend and her thigh shall sag, and a woman shall become a curse among her people. But if the woman has not defiled herself and is pure, she shall be unharmed and able to retain seed. In other words, the marriage will be saved and she'll be able to give birth. So drinking this unusual concoction is does not cause long-lasting harm. What it will do is, if she's innocent, will cure the husband of jealousy, will bring the wife back to the husband, so that their marriage will be strong and they will have a child. This is the ritual in cases of jealousy, when a woman goes astray while married to her husband and defiles herself, or when a fit of jealousy comes over a man and he is wrought up over his wife. The woman shall be made to stand before the Lord, and the priest shall carry out all this ritual with her. The man shall be clear of guilt, but the woman shall suffer for her guilt. Right? So that this is what the formula is. I just want to say, before reading below the line on 796, how our commentary can try to put this in a modern context, that during the post-Hanukkah, until the Romans came and destroyed the temple in the year 70. So Hanukkah was 165 BCE. Romans destroyed the temple in 70 CE. So for those 235 years, there was a dynasty, a Jewish dynasty in Israel. there were kings and queens of Israel during that time. The autonomy lasted a short period of time. That is, the Hanukkah victory over the Greeks lasted only about 100 years until the Romans came. The Romans allowed these kings and queens of Israel to still be there, but they were like puppets of the Roman Empire. But there are kings and queens, and one of the queens, I believe Shalom Sion, because the temple was standing in Jerusalem, she donated. She had this formula written down in gold to be displayed in the temple in Jerusalem, so that this whole procedure is called the sota, because it's the Hebrew word ish ki tiste ishto. That's in verse 12. So sota, sin, tet, vav he, is the woman who is treated this way by her husband. So this formula that is supposed to be written on parchment and then rubbed off into the water and the dirt, that formula was written in gold by Queen Shalom Sion, a woman, to be posted in the temple in Jerusalem. So if we look below the line, we'll see how our modern conservative rabbis try to make sense of this. The ordeal of the sotah, the woman suspected of betraying her husband, involves a strange and, at first reading, demeaning ritual. So I would argue this is the 100th reading, it's still demeaning. So it's not first reading that it's demeaning, it's 100th reading that it's still demeaning. At one level, it reflects the immense seriousness with which the Torah regards marital infidelity. All other transgressions recorded in the Torah can, if committed, be put right. If a man steals, he can return what he stole. If one withholds the wages of a laborer, he can pay him. But one who cohabits with a married woman is unable to restore her marriage to what it was previously. And that's from the Midrash on the book of Numbers. Okay, so that's how strongly the rabbis felt about marriage and why this ceremony is important. Rashi connects sota, literally deviant. If a man's wife has gone astray, tiste, sota, to shote, fool. It's the letter sin. If you put the dot, that makes it a sin. To the other side of the letter, it becomes a shin. So tishte, ish, whose woman has become foolish, or he's made his wife foolish, right? Reflecting the Talmudic dictum that no one sins unless overcome by foolishness. And that's the Talmud on of the tractate Sota. If we could clearly see the consequences of what we are tempted to do, we would never sin. People sin not out of calculation, but in a spirit of folly, losing control of their reasoning faculty. So one way to understand this is what happens when one's foolishness overtakes him. You can understand this like in a drunken stupor. The husband comes home drunk and declares that his wife has been unfaithful. The problem with understanding this as foolishness is that still there is a ritual to do, as opposed to the Kohen coming and doing private counseling with this husband, right? Because the Kohen does visit a family or a person if they have an unusual skin rash on their skin. So a Kohen does make house calls. Why wouldn't the Kohen make a house call here, right? So if it is foolishness, then the Kohen has to come and to kind of slap the guy about the face and make him not be foolish anymore. That could have been what the Torah could have demanded, but still the ritual here. So this interpretation that it's foolishness, it can only go so far because we're legislating foolishness. We're allowing the foolishness to be maintained, and there's still a formula. Why isn't there a similar treatment for a cheating husband? Because women were not in that position to claim anything against their husband. In ancient society and in rabbinic law, it is the husband who gives the wife the ketubah. It's not the wife who gives the husband a ketubah. The ketubah contains everything that the husband does for the wife. There's nothing in there about what the wife has to do for the husband. Okay, so a woman is never in a position of equality with a man. So that's why there isn't anything similar for a woman to do if she suspects her husband of being unfaithful. And even if the husband is unfaithful, if he's unfaithful, he is married. If he is unfaithful with a woman who is not married, he could just marry that new woman that he's been unfaithful with. And because you're allowed to have more than one wife, but a woman is not allowed to have more than one husband. So for these reasons, there isn't an equivalent ceremony for a woman who suspects her husband. So Rashi is continuing this back in the commentary about the foolishness, that interpretation only goes so far. The Talmud tells us that the ordeal of the sotah worked only in an age when people believed in its power to expose the guilty and exonerate the innocent. In the more cynical period of the Second Temple, it had to be discontinued. So, in other words, when people didn't believe in the power of God in this seemingly magical way, then the sotah ceremony went by the wayside. So it stopped probably shortly after that Queen Shalom Tzion had that gold plaque put in the temple, probably for the last 100 years of the Second Temple period. And of course, it's not done anymore. The question would be, if the temple would be rebuilt in Jerusalem in the time of the Messiah, would this be restored? So it goes on under verse 14 here as a continuation of this commentary on this section. It would seem that the sages understood the ordeal of the sotah less as a way of ferreting out adulteresses and more as a way of proving to the husband that his suspicions were groundless. A man who might not be satisfied with a court's finding of not guilty in the absence of proof would have to accept it, right? In other words, there were no witnesses to her supposed infidelity, and therefore she's not guilty because there's no proof. So that doesn't make the husband any happier. Okay, now I can trust my wife because this is what the court has said, that there's no proof. So this formula, this ceremony can kind of prove it. So there's something in the temple to do. God ordained this, and this should prove to the husband that, in fact, his wife is not guilty. So a man who would not be satisfied with the court's finding would have to accept the judgment of heaven, because it's unlikely that the ritual would produce a guilty verdict unless through the psychosomatic reaction of a truly guilty wife, right? How is dirt, water, and ink, dried ink mixed together, going to make your belly distend and your thighs sag? It might make you throw up. It might make you sick a little bit, but it's not going to do those physical deformities in your body, right? So it would never do that. Its purpose may well have been to alleviate the husband's suspicion and restore domestic harmony. We can understand the promise of verse 28, that if the woman is found innocent, she will be able to retain seed, as foreseeing that she will be restored to a life of love with her husband. That's really hard to say, and I'm not sure that any wife who was forced to submit to this ceremony in the Mishkan or in the temple in Jerusalem, not sure how any wife would love their husband again. Or even if they even loved, it's like Fiddler on the Roof, right? Did Tevye and Golda really love each other? It was a match, right? You grow to love each other. So that's even putting modern sense of marriage back into the Torah. So marriage may not have been about love. It was about convenience, or about parents agreeing that their children should be married. And then you're just raising a family and you're running the farm, and you need to do that with extra hands, and you do that by having children. So marriage might probably had nothing to do with love. So there was trust, though, and the woman needed to trust her man to take care of her. And so despite this ceremony, could a woman trust her husband again? That would be a better question to ask, and that is unclear. But even if the ordeal and subsequent pregnancy turn the husband's heart back to his wife, what will it take to restore her trust in him and affection for him? So that's really the question here about this ceremony. So it's difficult to read. It is it highlights the place women had in Jewish religious society, and it questions what God's role is in this. In other words, if we were writing a ceremony like this today, I don't think we would write a ceremony like this, and I don't think we would picture God wanting this to play out in this way. And so the fact that the Torah puts God into this and allows God allows God's name to be desecrated by written on that parchment and then rubbed off into the formula, raises lots of questions about this ceremony, and about how really religious this is, and the role of God in this, and the nature of the relationship between men and women. So any thoughts or comments about this that you might have, or other questions about this? Like how would you deal with this? Susan, go ahead, Susan.
I'm curious about if there are any Rebbe's commentary on this, either from way back or more recent, about how, if any of them.
So I think that the commentary here on this page is a typical commentary of a conservative rabbi, right? So in other words, if you know what, let me just run to my shelf to get the Reform Movement edition of the Chumash. And now let me open, and because I haven't checked this before, let me see what the editor of this Chumash has to say about the Sota. Yeah, just a second. Here we go. Yeah. One second here. Here we go. Okay, so this is what he says. This is Rabbi Gunther Plaut, who was the editor of the Reform Movement's Chumash. The procedure described is generally referred to as an ordeal. The term covers a variety of methods for ascertaining divine judgment through tests administered to persons suspected of certain crimes. Here, the suspicions of a jealous husband may be proved or disproved by giving his wife a mixture of sacred water, Ordeals of jealousy were known in the ancient Near East, though not in the precise form preserved here, and there were parallels in many other cultures. And the Code of Hammurabi from 1700 BCE has a following provision for a water ordeal. If a seigneur's wife was accused by her husband, but she was not caught while lying with another man, she shall make affirmation by God and return to her house. If the finger was pointed at the wife of a noble man because of another man, but she has not been caught while lying with the other man, she shall throw herself into the river for the sake of her husband. Okay, so one major problem inherent in the law of ordeal is the underlying assumption that by invoking the procedure, a husband could force God to make the truth known. No other Torah law is dependent on such a divine manifestation. According to the rabbis, an immediate response was expected to the test. Its use was an exception to the Talmudic principle that one should not rely on the occurrence of miracles, which is an interesting thing, right? When we pray for someone to get better, we want God to intervene to make that person better, but it might not happen with the snap of the fingers. But it happens right away here with this ceremony. According to Nachmanides, it was effective only as long as the majority of Israel did God's will, which is vague enough to suggest that this remnant of pre-biblical times had no permanent place in an imperfect society. In fact, at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple, moral fibers loosened to such an extent that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai abolished the test altogether. The law of ordeal implies that fidelity is an essential element in marriage, and that jealousy is a legitimate sentiment, for trust is the foundation of the marital covenant. As in all situations involving private or public trust, the parties must not only be faithful, but also appear to be worthy of confidence. So that's what Rabbi Plaut says about it. So he puts it in a historical context. He sees Reformed Jews in general see the Torah as a book like every other book, to be studied in a way like every other book is studied. So in that way, it might have relevance to our lives today. It might not, just like any other book. Whereas in the conservative movement and other traditional brands of Judaism, this book is not like any other book. And so we question not just putting it in its historical context, we have to say, okay, how can we make this relevant today? There are certain times that the rabbis themselves said that this law just is no longer relevant to our lives. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said it's no longer relevant. And they said that about the rebellious child. They said that about our eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, that's not done literally. So there are certain things that the rabbis themselves said, we just don't do this anymore. And though this was done in the time of the temple, as opposed to the rebellious child, which the rabbi said was never done, that it was never executed, an eye for an eye was never fulfilled literally. They said the sotah was done, but by the rabbinic time, it wasn't done anymore. So the best we can say, Susan, to all of this, what we can say about this is that this is an ancient way of, it's an ancient ceremony, and the only things that we can take away from this is that that marital peace is elusive, and that it is extremely hard for couples to have a perfect relationship all the time. And it is our job, for those of us who are in a committed relationship, to do the best we can to create an atmosphere in the home of love and trust. And I think that's that it should never have to get to the point in which we would force our partner to drink this disgusting formula. because I would suggest if it gets to that point, then the marriage, the committed relationship, is no longer salvageable. So I think that could be a powerful way to a lesson to take away from this, and to say that yes, it's demeaning, it's terrible. But let's put it in context for the time, and let's understand the deeper meanings behind here. What is the Torah saying about marriage? What is the Torah saying about relationships?
I think it needs a modern rewrite.
Okay, but that's
In a certain way, like, for instance,
you froze.
marital counselors. So just to, oh, okay, why there's no marital, why not go to a marriage counselor? So part of the rewrite would it's all in one direction in the original Sotah,
Right.
which is, of course, in the context of the society at the time.
Right.
Now that potion, what would equalize things is it says, yes, we're human and we are capable of our emotions really getting out of hand and really being jealous. And it doesn't even have to get to the point of it being infidelity. It could be someone looking at an attractive,
Right.
and people fly off the handle or
Right.
whatever. So one rewrite, which may be going into Gary Larson territory, is that the husband, if he's jealous of his wife, that he has to drink this potion ritual, or unless if he is unwilling to go to a marital counselor.
That's interesting.
There are different kinds of options,
Right.
but there needs to be a level. I'm all for kind of rituals as a way to clear out, negative energy or something, but there's the inequality here.
Yes.
That it's not a two-way street is the thing for modern times. That's
right. So let me say this, because the time is running out. Let me say just the idea that ritual can do something to help solve a problem like this. I'm not so sure that that's not a modern Jewish thing, and that's not a modern Western religion thing to do. Eastern religions and other more primitive religions have rituals to kind of like drive out a demon or cure an illness or something like that. We don't have rituals that do that.
Well, not to solve the rritual could be at the end, like a commitment
to mark the problem has
to
passed.
do better in that way.
Yeah.
But the problem, but there needs to be something that the emotion is owned by both whoever has it, and there's some responsibility to do tikkun atzmi, to do repair of oneself.
Well, so Susan, again, I'm sorry to cut you off, but just because of the timing here, I just want to make this point to what you're saying. The issue will be if we live to see the temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem, what's going to happen in the temple? And traditionalists would say what's going to happen in the temple is what's written in the Torah. Okay, it's clear. We're going to have all those sacrifices again, and we're going to have all those rituals as described in the Torah happen in the temple again. So the conservative movement says, not so sure. It's one thing to want the temple in Jerusalem to be rebuilt and to look forward to the centrality that the temple has for and the focus for the entire Jewish world, and what that could do to increase spirituality and commitment in the Jewish community. It's another thing to say we're going to have now a huge farm and warehouse of animals that we're going to be offering a sacrifice once again. That's just sacrifice, let alone the other rituals like this demeaning one here. So I would hope that, I don't really think about it so much when I recite the prayers that refer to the temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem. I think about it in that more abstract, spiritual, figurative kind of way. But if I were thinking about it, if the temple were rebuilt, I'd want updated kind of rituals and worship to happen there that would reflect modern morality, a modern take to Jewish morality and ethics. Okay, so what you're suggesting, Susan, is something I could buy into to happen in a temple in Jerusalem if it were to be rebuilt. Instead, what we have to do is take the lessons from the Torah portion, like this week's portion, and say, okay, what are we going to do with this sota ritual? Are we just going to read it and laugh at it? Are we going to read it and mock it? Are we going to read it and delete it? Or are we going to read it and try to make some kind of sense out of it? So my take as a conservative rabbi is you have to make some sense out of it, no matter, and the harder it is to make sense out of it, the more we have to do it, because it's there for a reason, and the Torah is not meant to be read literally every single word. Has to mean exactly what it meant 3,000 years ago. The Torah is meant to be read, reread, reinterpreted to develop new meanings. And if you can't develop new meaning, no, let me say it in the positive. The fact that we have been able to develop new meanings from the Torah for 3,000 years shows how sacred and different this text is than from any other piece of literature. Okay, because for Shakespeare, there's only so much that Shakespeare can have deep meaning on somebody's life, right? And so Shakespeare was brilliant, but it's not as everlasting, I would argue, as lessons from the Torah or any other sacred text of any other religion. Okay, so let's stop here for today. I wish everybody a continued safety and health. There's Minyan this evening at 7:30 for those interested in that. And be well. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.